With these words, I'd like to kick off the third panel of today's conference. The panel's title is sort of a philosophical one: Offshore knocking on Latvia's door. Are we welcoming it? Of course, we will definitely go beyond just Latvia's door. I think offshore is knocking on everybody's door today, wherever you have water somewhere nearby, and even those who don't have sea as their border can potentially harvest the benefits of offshore wind energy in their neighboring countries. So that is the positive effect of an integrated energy system. So let me welcome the panelists of this panel. We have an outstanding team of experts here, 4 of them in presence physically here in the room, and 1 expert remotely, but I'll give the floor to all of them to introduce themselves and say some key words about what is the most outstanding thing which the companies or organizations are doing right now. So let me begin with Paul.
Okay, thanks, and thanks for having us here. So my name is Paul Koldevin. I'm responsible for the offshore wind development activities RWE has in this region, in the Nordic countries, in Poland, and then obviously in the Baltic states. RWE is as you probably know, a global energy company. It's a leader in renewables. We are the second largest operator of offshore wind. We have a solid pipeline in all the renewable technologies, in offshore wind, in onshore wind, and in solar PV. With our ambitions now, you know, the markets such as the Baltic states are, you know, well suited for us, and they are well suited for a number of reasons, and then we can come back to the more detailed elements to it. But I guess as we already heard this morning, and it's been kind of repeated from time to time again, that you know, the technical potential of the waters outside of all the 3 Baltic states are really good. So that's a kind of a starting point. We as a company has been active in the Baltic Sea for a number of years, and per now we have 3 assets in operation in the Baltic Sea. We have 1 in Sweden, we have 1 in Denmark, we have 1 in Germany. We have 2 assets in development, 1 in Sweden and in Poland, and then we are looking forward to kind of engaging further into the markets here in the 3 Baltic states and Latvia as well.
Thank you, Paul. Exciting times ahead. Let's move over to Priit.
So hi, my name is Priit Lepasepp. I'm the founder and CEO of Sunly. Quite young company. Our team and investors, they started to invest into the Baltics and mainly in wind already in 2005. Today, this part of the business is now with Ava. But after that, we continued. The difference with the company that we operated before is that very quickly we have grown into very substantially big developer. Although we are an independent power producer in renewables, so wind, solar, and storage, basically 1 pump hydro project in Estonia, but batteries as well. But let's say our main market today is Poland. Altogether with the Baltics and Poland, we have 16.2 gigawatts of development. This is divided mainly by solar, which is more imminent pipeline, and then project under development in wind for the upcoming 3 to 5 years, and then also the storage project. And yeah, this is who we are. In 4 countries within these 3 years, 110 people, going strong, and it's very interesting.
Quite interesting times of growth for the company.
It is.
Marianne, over to you.
Thank you, Reynes. Very happy to be back this year for the second edition of WindWorks. My name is Marianne Hassel. I'm a lead developer at Ørsted, where I lead our development activities across several new markets, including Latvia and also the Baltics. For those of you who don't know Ørsted is what we like to call a global green energy major, and we have a renewables portfolio that spans the traditional generation, renewable generation technologies, offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar PV, where in addition to an increasing presence in renewable hydrogen. But we are probably best known for offshore wind, where we are the largest developer in the world. And we've been present in the Baltics the last couple of years, and we're very committed to developing offshore wind in the region together with our partner, Enefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Over to Aavo.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for organizers to giving me this opportunity. My name is Aavo Kärmas. I am the CEO of Enefit Green. Enefit Green is, as the name also says, a renewable company, one of the leading companies in our area and the number one in wind. And as of last autumn, Enefit Green is also, or Enefit Green shares are listed in Tallinn Stock Exchange, but still our major shareholder is Eesti Energia, national utility company. And yes, I mean, our core business is renewables. We are mostly focusing on wind and solar. So we have created quite sizable and visible near-term pipeline of onshore and then solar, which would allow us to grow our capacity more than 2 times by 2025. So currently we have already four onshore wind parks under construction in Estonia, Lithuania, and Finland. So by the end of next year, our operational wind capacity will reach 50%, and more projects to follow. And we consider our home markets Finland, Baltics, and Poland, where we have set up our operations and also our local teams. But yeah, I mean, looking forward beyond 2025, we have also quite a massive and sizable long-term pipeline of different projects, also consisting offshore wind. So in Enefit Green portfolio, we have 1 gigawatt project in Estonia called the Loode-Eesti project, which is currently under the EIA process. But that there is also another 1 gigawatt project which is currently developed by our parent company, is Liivi. It's in Riga Bay. It's also now a 1 gigawatt project, and I'm really happy to say that I would say that this is a most advanced offshore project in the Baltic countries, and then currently all the studies are ongoing, and if everything goes well, expected investment decision is 2025 or 2026. So certainly we expect that this will be operational before 2030. So this is very briefly about Enefit Green and what we are doing.
Great, thank you, Aavo. And last but not least, Edis, over to you again. I know this is the second panel today for you, but those who have joined, please explain for those who you represent.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here. It's my second panel, so I will be a little bit maybe shorter than previous speakers. I have introduced myself, but I'm Edis Šaitans. I'm representing Ministry of Economics, and currently I'm Deputy State Secretary of Energy Issues. And the main topic, actually, what I'm doing in Ministry, all energy policy which is set it up or is planned in future, it's my responsibility, and that's what I'm doing in the ministry. Therefore, I cannot maybe explain what ministry has how much capacities and gigawatts, but I can say that we are here to somehow help and partner with all potential investors and developers of project how to reduce the barriers in the legal process, in the legal framework.
Thank you. It seems that the ministry actually has all the gigawatts that we have, so everything that is on the territory, so that's in the ministry's portfolio in a way. But all right, with this on this positive note, let me, Edis, actually go back to you immediately after your introduction. And since the title of the panel is offshore wind energy knocking on Latvia's door, are we welcoming it? It's not by chance that we have this title, and everybody here is aware that Latvia has been lagging behind, in fact, over the last 10-15 years in terms of developing wind energy in the Baltic states. Lithuanians have much more, although owned by Estonian companies still, but Estonia is also investing plenty and has been investing, although with a small decline over the very recent years. But Latvia has been somewhere really, really far behind those two neighbors. What can you say to make the industry and the society think that things are going to change now?
Yeah, I will start maybe a little bit from wider perspective to explain where we stand in Latvia. Actually, I do not want to compare ourselves with colleagues, with neighbors, with Lithuania, Estonia. I think it's not
fair enough.
Will not be polite where we stand and so on. But actually, what we have in Latvia, we have our own plans. We have our own strategy. We know where we need and how much we need of renewables. It's clearly defined in our energy policy documents, and we are committed to go with them and try to increase our renewable shares. And if we look about the renewables, of course, it's today we are talking about the wind, and here, if a little bit comparisons with neighbors, I can agree with you. We are a little bit lagging behind, but I'm looking on the renewable shares from the bigger picture. And then, if you look on the such side, then I could say that Latvia is quite a good position. But nevertheless, of course, we see that there is a great need to increase our renewable share in Latvia. I think it's not currently it's not a will, it's not our wish, but I think it's our need, especially if we look on current geopolitical situation where we stand and how can we increase our energy dependency and the security of supply. I think that is our must-have strategy what we should follow. And I am quite committed that according to all these preset targets and preset routes what we have in our policy documents, we are ready to, in the nearest future, to get, I could say, some rapid up increase of our renewable generation. I think in the further discussion we will come back to this, and I can explain maybe where we stand and what are the projects ongoing and what are the total capacities. But actually, just to summarize what I said, actually, I don't want to compare ourselves with our neighbors. That's point one. I think we have our own road, we have our own strategy, and we are committed to go with the strategy and reach our targets and our goals.
Thank you. I think fair enough. Your comment was really good and much appreciated. And we also have representatives from 4 commercial companies here. Some bigger, some big, some not as big, but at least the plans are really huge for all of those companies. And definitely they are looking at the Baltic states as a very interesting and prospective market for offshore wind energy. Of course, not exclusively for offshore wind energy, but also for other renewables, as we've heard not once already today, but still this is about this conference is about offshore wind. So let's focus on that still. So having 4 companies on this panel, it seems that there is interest in this market, however small it may seem at first glance. I mean, not a big territory. The consumption is not as big as in Western Europe or in Scandinavia. What makes still companies and investors willing to invest in this region, especially if we speak about offshore wind? Who would like to jump in first? I don't know. Maybe Paul, you go ahead.
Yeah, I can start. And, I'm sure the other colleagues will follow on. You know, first of all, and just as a side comment to kind of the start from our representative from the ministry. Of course, it's fair enough now to, and you can probably have a good discussion on which country is in the lead or not. Huh? Fair enough. But I do think there is a broad step change in how the different countries now approach offshore wind or renewables as such. We have talked about this many times over, this morning. There's been kind of repetition of, the topics of, on the one hand, climate change, the other hand, the security of supply because of the geopolitical situation. I think all of this is sort of coming now to the national regulators. Huh? So that's the kind of the setting, and then and the other part of that is when we now look at offshore wind, especially. I think we've seen and the cost development for offshore wind, the kind of the levelized level of cost for a new offshore wind asset is come down significantly, making it more commercially attractive, and it also makes it easier for the different states, for the regulators to accept this kind of technology coming into their markets. It's not like for 10 years back where most of these projects would be having some kind of stabilizing mechanism. Now it's more competitive. It is, and I think if you compare renewables and onshore, offshore with new coal-based power generation, renewables will beat that flat out. So that's kind of the scene, I think, for this discussion. When we looking at these markets, of course, it's we are a developer who is in the market for the long term. So we would look for opportunities, and then have let's say a stepwise approach. Starting with one asset, developing that, and then building the asset base as we go along. We have good examples from that in our development phase, and I think that's the case also for the 3 Baltic states. That we will be looking for opportunities. I'm confident that we will be able to monetize those assets, in the first instance. Then eventually, I think, and it's pretty clear that the potential in these 3 states are also a potential that will be, say, export oriented. That will come. It's not for next year. It's not for the year after. But those plans will also come eventually and lead to more development and also more energy production with a kind of an outlook towards Europe, I would say.
Yes, Aavo, of course, Enefit Green has plenty of assets in the Baltic states, not so many in Latvia, but Lithuania and Estonia definitely. So you still see potential for growth. I think cumulatively there could be plenty of wind energy in some 10 years' time.
Yes, absolutely. We do see. But that maybe just to elaborate that from our side is that certainly we believe that there is a role for different ways of energy production in a total mix. And certainly if we look with kind of energy market size in the Baltics today, and from what electricity has been produced so far, and all the 3 countries, also as a Finland, we are kind of net importers of electricity. That means that we need the local generation here. So, and if we talk about future and net zero vision, so certainly we strongly believe that we cannot achieve it without having operational offshore wind parks in the Baltics. But saying that, I mean, what is the total capacity in the Baltics for offshore? It's around 30 gigawatt, whereabout.
30, you mean?
Yeah, 30. I mean, in Estonia it's 9, in Latvia 15, Lithuania 7 or something. But nevertheless, but this is just an opportunity. Opportunity does not mean that it's operational capacity. And now the thing is that how to use this opportunity. And then what does it offer to different companies? Because, you know, Enefit Green, we are a local company. We cannot compare ourselves with Total or Ørsted, for instance. But of course, I cannot speak for you, but that still investors are looking, they have different opportunities or business options on their table every day. So that here we have to understand that the Baltic countries, this was just one investment opportunity, one investment option. So that means that in order to utilize this 30 gigawatt opportunity, we have to think that how to make the Baltic countries more attractive compared to other countries around the world. I'm not talking about only Europe, I'm talking globally. So I think that I would kind of, I'm thinking on that scale. And then coming back to your question, yes, I mean, of course, we are, as I said, we have 2 offshore projects currently in Estonia. Of course, we're looking closely what's happening in Latvia, but also in Lithuania as well, our home markets.
Great. So, Marianne, over to you. Do you think the markets, as small as the Baltic markets, comparatively, I mean, to the global markets, what makes it still so lucrative for Ørsted? Ørsted is definitely having a close look at this area on the map. What makes you think there's still potential and there are already companies competing? I mean, is the market inexhaustible?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Rinus. So I think it's an interesting question, right? I think that at least from Ørsted's perspective, there's very much a willingness to invest in Latvia and the Baltics. I think, you know, as an offshore wind developer, anywhere where there's potential, I think we are looking, right? But I think it is quite interesting, this question of sort of the size of the markets, because if you take sort of one of our latest development projects in the UK, Hornsea 3, this is a park that's 2.4 gigawatts. And when it's operational one day, it will be able to power 2 million homes. That's more than twice the amount of households in Latvia. So when I think about offshore wind in a Latvian context, I can't help but ask myself sort of, what is the role that offshore wind is going to play? Because you can say sort of domestic electricity demand, is not going to be enough ultimately. Also taking into account that Latvia has an enormous onshore wind potential that's also not been tapped. And what we see in a lot of markets is that oftentimes you'll seek to kind of reach your onshore saturation before you move into offshore, depending a little bit on how the permitting issues and what kind of NIMBY issues there are. So I think, Latvia has a large potential and a large technical potential, but offshore is also a large scale technology. So I think my sort of challenge or question would be a little bit, well, sort of what is Latvia's vision for their path to net zero? And how does that fit in with the journey that we're on in the Baltics and in Europe? And how does offshore wind fit into that picture? Because it's going to take other sort of offtake sources. It's going to take export. It's going to take hydrogen to be able to sort of really leverage and harness the potential of offshore wind and what that can bring.
Right. Well, it seems that still, regardless of how seemingly small the Baltic market may seem, so there's still plenty of business opportunity, right? So that's what I'm reading from the comments so far. Preet, Sunly is a relatively small company and relatively new company, which has plenty of experience already, and there are many things in your bag, right? The offshore wind is just one that you are aiming at, and I think it's especially good or not good, but rather interesting that smaller companies look at developing offshore wind energy as part of a broader energy system as well, right? You have to diversify. It's the story about putting eggs into one basket or in many baskets, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and also solar and wind is, I think, for the sake of future and capitalism, also the easiest to finance. Everything else that you burn, unfortunately, will be more and more unpopular in future wouldn't even be biomass, for example. It will, in that sense, have to be switched towards solar, wind, or offshore, or storage, or hydro storage, for example. So what I see in the Baltics, I think the news coming from the idea of the Baltic Sea supergrid is one of the very important parts, because it's a way and the idea which really brings Europe together. That basically you will have one big system where there are different production units connected, when there are also possibilities to consume, or there are consumers. So the idea that you will start with this grid up from the Baltic Sea, go down to Germany, it's a very good example of a very good idea. And if this comes, then the Baltic Sea potential is huge, and the Baltics have a huge potential also due to the mere fact that if you look at the sea depth in all of our countries, it's good, and still we have wind, and Baltic Sea is in that sense has many good things to add. It's not so salty and so on. At the same time, coming to how offshore could end up in Latvia, what I recommend still from the history, learn a little bit from Estonia and Lithuania. I personally think, and being also involved with this Loode Eesti wind farm, which is near Hiiu Island. This application, the first application was applied in 2007. Then the regulation was made. We didn't have oil or gas, anything on the sea. So the only way that Estonians use it was for sea transportation, fishing, and so on. So we did regulation, this project, and this Riia Bay Liivi project also applied in 2010. We are at the moment in April 22. We are still doing the environmental impact assessments. It's a very bad example how to do stuff. If we do very elementary stuff like this, then it shouldn't be like this. Even the mere fact, in environmental impact assessments, usually it's so that if you take something so long, you will give arguments to the opponents, because then you have to redo the stuff again and again and again, and this is something to learn from Estonia. And in case of Lithuania, I like the auction scheme, how they are doing it. I like also the Estonian scheme, how they let others to come and use the seabed and test it out, and let's see who will win, because it's the same that at the moment Enefit Green has good projects. There are, for example, near Saaremaa, there is a Saare wind project, and it started in 2015. It's moving also very quickly. And in offshore, you never know, even though you started in 2007 or 10, you never know who will be first, because this kind of regulation, you need to build up the regulation, then you need to do the administrative parts. It all takes very long. And I think from there, Latvia has a lot to learn to do things faster. So my prediction is that Lithuanians will have the first offshore wind farm in the Baltics. And then Latvians have the chance to have the second, and then there are Estonians, not like conflicting with Aavo, but the idea is that just mere belief that how it has gone and how I've seen it gone in Estonia, very personally, with sweat, blood, and not slept hours, and in court and in many courts, then yeah. This is something that I think Latvia should at least this part should learn.
Shall I perceive what you said, just a diversion of attention, just to make us sleepy and happy about the fact that we might be the second ones here in Latvia, but right. There's a bit of joke in every joke, okay. But
yes.
Eddie,
I have my opinion on that.
You want to jump in on that quickly?
No. As I said, I still think that Liivi will be first, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I think that this is not the thing where we have to, compare or compete. As I said, that this is our common goal. I mean, that to have more generation in our sea waters.
Just to make it interesting.
Yes, just to...
I think we have to, at the end of this, we have to make a bet and see what happens. But anyhow, I think in the Baltics, if we take wherever it comes, it's a good sign. So it's not like competing in that sense. It's a good sign. It will come, and I think it will come. And let's see, it was so that when wind started in the Baltics, then the grid companies told that there is X amount of megawatts that you can put into the grid. Look what is going on now. The number is all the time growing, nothing really, okay, the grids are also investing, but at the same time, nothing is also happening on the vice versa side. So there are obviously grid limitations, but I think in future, in the next 15 years, there will be more offshore than we think today.
Yes, the next panel actually will go deeper into the grid factor or grid aspect of all of this. That's going to be extremely interesting, I think. But Eddie's right. You've heard what the commercial companies have said, all right? So they are, well, currently on this panel alone, there are 4 companies eager to to conquer the market and to be the first ones or the second ones, and to get a bigger chunk of this potential 30 gigawatt capacity. And I wonder whether there is any reasonable, if we can actually set formally any reasonable limit to what makes sense, what capacity makes sense to be deployed from the regulatory perspective or policy perspective. Of course, one thing is we have national energy and climate plans, right? So these play heavily in favor also of commercial enterprises which are looking for market opportunities and business opportunities. But from the perspective of the state and the regulatory power, so to say.
I will start, I think, with one important point which should be mentioned. I think there will be never anything that everyone likes. It's always, there is 2 sides of any challenge, and we need to find, I think, the balanced middle way how to move forward. And I have a lot of times here that we have a lot of potential, and I agree that we have a lot of potential both onshore and offshore. But then for us as a Ministry of Economics, who is responsible to setting up sustainable, affordable and secure energy, it's of course we need to evaluate how much we need and who will pay the costs and what will be the benefits to our society. And then based on all these criteria, we as energy policy developers, of course, we are looking what is the best trajectory where we as a state can go. And as you correctly mentioned, Reinis, we had such a planning documents, policy planning documents in place in Latvia. And one of them is, and I could say the main one for us, it's National Energy and Climate Plan. It also should be mentioned that next year it will undergo the amendments due to the whole situation, what is happening, and of course it will have also a different angle. But despite the fact, we have to stick with all this policy what we have defined. And if we look on this maybe capacity amounts, what we as a state see it's necessary for us to get in the market, and it's also, I didn't mention actually the grid, and there will be an additional panel of such a discussion. But that is one of important topics that should be taken into account when we are discussing on the potential what we can deploy here in Latvia. And for us currently, just to remember what is mentioned in our plan, it's up to 1,000 megawatts. It's the initiative target, what was mentioned, to reach our goals as a state. Of course, we do not say that that's a maximum amount, that's a minimum amount what we need to reach our goals. That's based on our modeling system, which shows that our targets will be reached. Currently, of course, we see that the development in Latvia is speeding up, and currently we see that till 2030 we assume that it could be up to 2 gigawatts capacities, which could be implemented in Latvia. But after we need to look what are the loads of generation and consumption, and then figure out what's our next goals. Currently, it's what I need to mention is that we cannot look on Latvia alone. We as the Baltic states are really well interconnected, and I think we need to look on the balance what we have in all region. And to be honest, we as the Baltic states and region, we are in deficit. We are in deficit, if I'm correct from my head currently, till the 2025, when we will synchronize with Europe, we will be in deficit, I think, more than 10 terawatt hours a year. Therefore, of course, there is potential, there is some opportunities to use them, to make this generation, but I think we need to use these potentials, what we have in Latvia and as well as in our both neighbors. We need to use them smart, with the objectives what we really need. There is no need to run in the front of the train to deploy all these potentials what we have, and then someone will pay for that. Therefore, I think we are pragmatic. We are looking on the needs what we have to reach our goals, and of course we are not that we are putting any barriers on the potential private developers who want to come and give more capacities. It's up to them. But of course, we are looking on the free market, and we are not putting any barriers in this case. If to summarize, I think currently we see that our plan current is up to 1 gigawatt, and we see that the updates are going every day, and we see that till the 2030 it could be up to 2 gigawatts here in Latvia. It's covered by the wind, actually.
Thanks for the very good comments. Mariana, well, looking at the Baltic market in general, also Latvian market specifically, how much would you say, what sort of importance does the policy actually have in the way that a company like Ørsted actually is looking at the markets? Currently, it looks like it has quite quickly escalated, even given a moment a year ago, right? A year ago, you were on the panel again, and you remember there was quite a great caution about wind energy. Now, there's seemingly huge support, but how much do you rely in looking at the markets on the signals from policymakers and regulators?
Yeah, so I think the regulatory framework is a key parameter when we look at a new market, and when we also make a decision to enter a market, and also as we progress and ultimately take a final investment decision. I think ideally what we look for when we go in is we look for clear targets, so such as those that Eddie's just mentioned. And we also look for a supportive framework around that. So sort of what does the permitting process look like? What does the tender framework look like? And to what extent that the government can actually streamline that. That is something that's very important. I think, as my colleague here from Sunley alluded to, in Estonia, that's a big challenge, right? That these permitting processes, they really drag out. And I think, for example, an initiative that Latvia has, like the Green Corridor, which sort of allows you to sort of streamline and work with, and that essentially forces the different entities that you need to provide input on these kind of applications, is a really good step in that direction. I think another important thing here is, and I know that there's a lot of discussion about support mechanisms, and you know, we always talk about how the cost of offshore wind has come down, and it certainly has, and it is now a very, very competitive technology. But I think it's important to keep in mind, and especially I think when you look towards sort of other Central European markets like Denmark, like Germany, like the Netherlands, where you see these so-called zero subsidy bids. I mean, these are markets where you have kind of that have been maturing over the last 20 years. The kind of cost per megawatt, so to speak, to build in these markets is way different than when you go into new markets. So I think that an important thing that we look for, especially in new markets, is sort of a revenue stabilization mechanism, such as a CFD. And ultimately, we believe that that's the best way to ensure, as a government, that you get the supply that you need at the time that you need it. Because it is fine to leave it up to the market, and in reality is when you can do that, you definitely should. But I think energy is always political. And if you leave it to the market, then it will also follow the timing of the market. And that means that essentially when the business case materializes, that will be when it's built. So it's important to understand sort of something about your fundamentals. How does it differ from others? And what are those kind of business cases that the developers are looking into? Because you may be surprised to find out that there's a lot of interest, but then that evaporates later on when those business cases don't materialize.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's an important aspect. In fact, I saw that Avo had a comment.
Thanks very much. I just absolutely agree what Marianne was saying. That I just wanted to maybe add here about this CFD. We're talking here about offshore, right? And the offshore is a large scale. It's a large scale, not in terms of infrastructure, but also in terms of investment or of a capex. And then that brings me back to what I said at the beginning, that still you need to make your area attractive. And then certainly, I mean, when we're talking about the CFD, when we're thinking about the CFD as a massive support mechanism, we are in the wrong way, actually. So this is, we are kind of used to, at least I can talk about Estonia. In Estonia we had this old subsidy scheme, and people still can see it from their monthly electricity bill that this has been really massive. But the idea at that time was absolutely different. So it was, the technology was not competitive enough, and it was one way how to push growth in renewables. But those times have gone. But still, I agree here that in order to make long-term and quite substantial investments, you need to have some kind of revenue security. And then that means that I'm not talking only from a perspective of a company. I'm also talking here about the win-win situation for a whole society. That for that money, what you probably will use or not use, we all will get more green energy. And in faster. So this is, I absolutely wanted to comment here that it's important.
Yeah. Paul, you also wanted to comment.
I completely agree with Marianne's comment on this matter. It's our position as well. We are also, obviously looking for the right setup here in terms of regulatory matters and so on. So basically, policy matters, huh? It is important that we have a kind of a clear direction of what is, the targets, what is the working mechanisms behind the target. We talked about, there will be a session on grid and transmission capacity. Of course, that's key, right? That there is a visibility on, what are the plans from the TSO? Which way are we going to be able to go to the market? So all of these elements need to come in. And then, as you rightly say, the subsidy, which we in the old days would call subsidies, right? Which actually was subsidies. Today, that's quite different. And I think, stabilizing mechanisms is a good word. But if it is important, and let's say it's important for Latvia to have a certain level of renewables into the energy mix by, say, 2030, if they want to have the control, I think then, and yes, assuming, that's an argument and it's obviously a political decision, but if they want to have the control of getting a material offshore wind project flying, they can do that. It is possible to do that. They can, it's possible to have a reasonable CFD mechanism. It's possible to align with the new regulatory frameworks that are coming also from the EU level, and speed up all of these processes. So it is kind of we are interested to be a part of that development, but it takes two to tango, huh? So on the policy side, they need to, it needs to kind of come together.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for these comments. And actually, I want to jump quickly back to Marianne. A big company, Ørsted, right? But still, would you say that from the experience in the Scandinavian countries, how easy has it been historically there to promote offshore wind energy? Would you say that there are some particularly some particular, well, I don't know, approaches in the Scandinavian countries which have allowed for Denmark, I don't know, Norway, Sweden to be slightly more successful than other regions in Europe in terms of wind energy deployment? Something characteristic, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's actually quite a big difference here between the three Scandinavian countries. I think if you look at the approach that Sweden has been taking, and Norway as well, it's been vastly different, right? And Denmark has really been kind of the first mover within offshore wind. We installed the first offshore wind farm in Denmark back in 1991. So it's actually it's an old and mature industry in that sense. I think in terms of sort of, what has been, done well, so to speak, is I think that there was a lot of government support from the beginning. I think that the Danish Energy Agency has sort of, or through the Danish Energy Agency, there is one entity that manages sort of everything related to offshore wind. And that makes it very easy and very transparent for a developer to go in there. So I think that's an important thing, which I also alluded to before. I think, we talked about targets, right? We talked about alignment with the TSO. We talked about, alignment of the permitting procedures. Ultimately, to sort of build offshore wind, there are so many stakeholders that have to come together and agree. And that can be very hard to do as a private developer. So, as Paul said, it takes two to tango, right? It's definitely something that it's the public and the private sector that needs to work together on. And I think that's one thing that has been historically done very well in Denmark, is that you have a very strong collaboration between the private and the public sector on critical things like offshore wind.
Yeah, thanks. Preet has a comment.
Yes, I think as a country, countries have to have electricity, and I think as a country you should have developed projects that are ready to build, whatever situation is. Is it Ukrainian war? Is it somebody trying to manipulate the gas market and you would like to switch the plans? If you look, for example, Finland, let's say before 2010, it was behind of Estonia. So at that time there was not much wind. Estonia had more onshore wind, and but what happened was that due to different regulational changes, for example, in Estonia, the subsidy cuts started to happen. So what then happened was that there was no auctions, the subsidy story was all the time there, and for 10 years almost nothing was developed. Just for the mere fact that there was other countries you could develop and you could earn money. And the idea of the auctions is that even if the result of a CFD auction is zero, what it does is that in the beginning there starts to be this development business. If we look this, for example, suddenly growth, there are other companies in the Baltics and in Poland doing the same thing. There is ordinary competition among companies. But I think it's a very bad position to be where you don't have the projects at all in your country. Just for this kind of crisis where you need them to be. So I think it's very relevant as a state to show that not only in which direction you want to go, but what are the mechanisms. And I really, in that sense, like the Polish view on it, that they have the plan. Even if they reach their solar plan, they then decided that they will do it even more. So these are the good examples that can come out of it, because if you look in Estonia, solar is booming, in Poland, solar is booming. There are subsidies, but if you look at the CFD auctions in Poland, the prices are lower than the market prices are, indicating that these are basically a security auction. So securing your revenues for financing, nothing else. But as a state, you would like to show yourself a place where you invite those investors who will take the higher risk, because even investing into this kind of huge pipeline, it still takes millions to do.
Right, you are. Actually, there's I'll return briefly to the slide, though, as we are moving towards the end of the panel, and there's a question to Edis, which is about, to a certain, obviously there's an observation or suspicion that the state is more willing to support development of wind energy together with a company which is associated with state capital. So to say, I don't know if there's a place for that, but obviously the person who wrote the question basically is willing to see more open competition, or at least a clearly open competition between all potential participants on the market. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I can say we as a state and we as a ministry, we are for the open competition. We do not want to give any exemptions also for state-owned companies or state capital companies. They should go the same way as any other private project. But what I can say, actually, it also relates to the previous discussion. I will be in the opposite side, actually. I think my role also here a little bit challenge also as a project developers. From my side, and we as a state has decided a couple of time ago that for state as the first priority is to open all these potential projects as a market-driven projects. And whatever we call them, or the stabilization mechanism or support mechanism, subsidy, it doesn't matter. It's something what you call from the state, and someone should pay for that. And that's the reason why also in Latvian's policy documents is clearly stated that first priority for us is market-driven projects. And only in the case if the market-driven projects will not succeed, then we as a state come in and can evaluate whether there is possibilities to implement some support schemes. Otherwise, we currently, till the moment when the political decision and political framework will not be changed, we are in the position that we are supporting the market-driven projects. And we are for the openness. We will not give any privilege to also state-owned companies. They should follow the same rules as all private projects. That should be clear from our side.
Thank you. I think such an answer was expected. I mean, the clarity of the answer is here, I think. So thanks for that. There's actually another question which sort of is not directly related to the markets and the willingness of companies to compete here, but using the opportunity that we have two big companies here, there was a question which came in late for one of the previous panels. It's about floating wind turbines, which can be deployed in deeper waters, and the question is about the safety of those, especially in rough waters. I don't know if either Marianne or maybe Paul could very briefly in 1 minute explain whether there is this challenge of security or safety of such technology before we wrap up the whole panel.
I can say a few words on that. I think it's obviously it needs to be designed in the proper way. It needs to be anchored in the proper way. It's kind of the basis for even having a floating turbine is that it is floating in a secure way, and you would do sufficient, say, engineering work to make sure that actually is the reality. And by now we have in the industry, I would say, there is good examples of floating offshore wind assets that have been operating for a number of years, right? So on our side, we do demonstration projects per now. We don't have any particular issues with regards to safety on that. For seafarers and so on, it's more or less like for any asset.
Yeah. One reason why I decided to bring in this question here is not just because it was left behind somewhere and hanging out there alone, but because offshore wind with floating turbines could open up more physical space for business in the Baltic Sea as well, and that has been for quite some time a debate that the physical space on the continental shelf in the exclusive economic zone of the countries, of the Baltic Sea region countries, is, although big, it's rather limited because it competes with defense interests, it competes with maritime shipping, it competes with fishing, it competes with recreation, and I mean, whatnot. I mean, there's plenty, at least 5 areas which compete with each other in a way, and I have a suspicion that energy interests are, for probably also quite objective reasons, somewhere towards the end of the priority list among these spheres which compete. So it's simply these floating offshore turbines could open up a whole new world in a way, also in the Baltic Sea. So it's the potential is there. We are actually closing into the end of the panel, and there wouldn't be enough time for each of you to give some sort of a final sentence here. We won't probably manage that, but if I may, with your permission, try to summarize this in the following way, and you can either nod this way or completely wrong once you listen to what I say. All right, so the market has almost no limit because we can export the energy that we produce, right? Yes? No? Right. So in theory, we are currently speaking about capacities over the next 5-10 years, which are nowhere near the cumulative potential capacity, right? Okay. So the market for business opportunities is there, right? Okay. The regulatory, well, there is a political will from the Baltic governments, which is also sealed in the national development, energy sector development documents, which facilitate development of this market and participation of market participants. That is correct, right? Okay, so it seems that we have, well, I'll skip the many more important details, but generally we can say and conclude that it looks like the Baltic states and the Baltic Sea countries in general are a good place for offshore wind development, and it's just that we are at the very beginning on the eastern side of Östersjö, as the Scandinavians say, right? So I'm personally looking forward to new projects and initiatives, and let the competition decide who is the quickest, the fairest, and the most successful one. All right.
Thank you.
So with these words, I would like to thank all the panelists. I absolutely enjoyed also this discussion, just as the previous ones. And thank you, Marianne, Paul, Preet, Avo, and Edis in particular, because you were like hanging out there against the market forces, the wild market forces. But I absolutely enjoyed this. I hope those following the conference online also enjoyed this debate. And with this, allow me to finalize this panel.